My son Thomas stood in the mahogany-paneled law office, his designer suit sharp as the smirk cutting across his face. $3, Dad, he whispered, leaning close enough that I smelled his expensive cologne. That's all Mother left you. $3 pathetic dollars from her $180 million. His manicured fingers drummed victoriously on the conference table as we waited for the estate attorney to begin reading my ex-wife Margaret's will. I kept my weathered hands folded, watching him gloat, knowing something he didn't. The morning sun filtered through the law office windows, casting long shadows across the polished table where my life would supposedly crumble. But as I sat there watching my son Thomas adjust his gold cufflinks with practiced arrogance, my mind drifted back through the decades to when everything was different. 30 years ago, Margaret and I had started Whitmore Pharmaceuticals in our garage with nothing but determination and a shared vision. I still remember those early days mixing compounds until 3 in the morning, while she pored over business plans at our kitchen table. We'd survive on coffee and leftover pizza, dreaming of the day our research would help people who couldn't afford life-saving medications. I was the scientist, she was the business mind. Together, we were unstoppable. By our 10th anniversary, Whitmore Pharmaceuticals had gone public. By our 20th, we were worth hundreds of millions. But somewhere along the way, success became a poison more deadly than any compound I'd ever studied. The change started subtly. Margaret began attending charity galas alone, claiming I was too focused on the lab. She hired personal trainers, stylists, and life coaches. When she met Richard Blackstone at a venture capital conference 5 years ago, I saw the writing on the wall. Richard was everything I wasn't anymore, 15 years younger, impeccably dressed and fluent in the language of hostile takeovers rather than humanitarian drug programs. The divorce was swift and surgical. Margaret's lawyers painted me as an absent workaholic who'd neglected his family for test tubes and clinical trials. The fact that those trials had saved thousands of lives in developing nations didn't make it into the court documents. She walked away with 70% of our assets, the mansion in Westchester, the vacation homes, and most painfully, our son's loyalty. Thomas had been 27 then, old enough to see through the facade, but young enough to be seduced by it. The boy who'd once helped me in the lab, who'd written his college thesis on affordable medicine distribution, transformed overnight. He moved into the mansion with his mother, and Richard took a vice president position at the company that felt more like a throne than a job, and began treating me like a relic from an embarrassing past. Our monthly dinners became quarterly, then biannual, then non-existent. When we did meet, usually at my insistence, he'd spend the entire time checking his phone or making snide comments about my modest ranch house in the suburbs. "You could have fought harder, Dad," he'd say. "Maybe if you'd paid attention to the business instead of playing saint to the poor, we'd still be a family." 2 years ago, everything shifted again. Margaret was diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer. Despite our history, I reached out immediately, offering to help find the best oncologists to leverage my pharmaceutical connections for experimental treatments. But Thomas became a wall between us. "She doesn't need your pity," he'd told me during one of his rare phone calls. "And she definitely doesn't need reminders of when she settled for less. Richard's handling everything." I tried sending flowers cards, even stopping by the mansion, but was turned away each time by security. The son I'd raised to value compassion had become a stranger who wore cruelty like an expensive watch. What I didn't know then, what would only come to light later, was that Thomas's transformation went deeper than simple greed. My former secretary Janet Morrison, who'd worked with me for 20 years before the divorce, still kept in touch. She'd moved to a different division, but remained loyal to the old days when Whitmore Pharmaceuticals meant something more than stock prices. 3 weeks before this, will reading, Janet had called me with trembling voice. "Gary, I need to show you something. Can we meet at that coffee shop on 53rd Dakar?" I found her at a corner table, laptop open, looking over her shoulder nervously. "I could lose my job for this," she whispered, sliding the computer toward me. "But you deserve to know what your son's been doing." On the screen were email threads between Thomas and someone identified only as RB, Richard Blackstone, I assumed. The messages detailed a systematic campaign to turn Margaret against me, including fabricated emails where I supposedly threatened to contest any will that didn't give me half the estate. "He's been showing these to Margaret," Janet explained, "making her believe you're just waiting for her to die so you can swoop in and take everything. He's got her convinced you're the enemy." But that wasn't the worst part. The emails also discussed meetings with Richard's lawyers, plans for something called Project Legacy, and repeated references to making sure the old man gets exactly what he deserves. Janet had risked everything to bring me this information. As I read through the messages, my hands steady, despite the betrayal cutting through me, I realized my son hadn't just chosen sides in a divorce. He'd become something I never thought possible, an enemy to everything Margaret and I had built together. "There's more," Janet said, glancing around the nearly empty coffee shop. "Thomas has been meeting with Richard every week. Not at the office, but at Richard's private club. My friend in accounting says large transfers have been moving through departments Thomas oversees, always just under the amounts that trigger board review." I thanked Janet, assured her I'd keep her involvement secret, and left that coffee shop with a decision to make. I could confront Thomas, probably push him further into his schemes. Or I could do what I'd done in the laboratory all those years, observe, document, and wait for the right moment to act. As I sat in that law office now, watching Thomas practically vibrate with anticipation of his inheritance, I thought about the boy he'd been. The child who'd cried when we had to put down our family dog, who'd spent his allowance buying sandwiches for homeless veterans, who told me once that he wanted to be just like me when he grew up. That boy was gone, replaced by this designer-suited stranger who saw dollar signs where there should have been tears for his dead mother. But I'd learned something in my 67 years, that Thomas, in all his perceived sophistication, had missed true wealth isn't measured in what you take, but in what you leave behind. The estate attorney, James Pemberton, cleared his throat, preparing to begin. Thomas shot me one last triumphant look, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. I nodded back pleasantly, my face revealing nothing of what I knew of what was coming. Because while Thomas had been scheming to steal an inheritance, I'd been uncovering the truth about who my son had become. And sometimes, the best response to a carefully laid trap is to let the hunter catch himself. Margaret's funeral took place on a gray Thursday morning that matched the mood perfectly. The Cathedral of St. John on Madison Avenue overflowed with pharmaceutical executives, society figures, and politicians who'd benefited from her charitable donations. I arrived early, choosing a seat in the back row, where shadows offered some protection from curious stares. Thomas played his part flawlessly. He stood at the pulpit in a black Armani suit, tears streaming down his face, as he delivered a eulogy that rewrote our entire family history. According to his version, I was the absent father who'd chosen test tubes over Little League games, who'd abandoned the family when things got difficult. He painted Margaret as a single mother, who'd raised him despite my neglect with Richard Blackstone, as the stepfather who'd shown him what real success looked like. Each word was calculated to twist the knife a little deeper. The congregation nodded sympathetically, shooting disapproving glances toward the back where I sat. Patricia Hawthorne, Margaret's best friend, and our company's CFO, was one of the few who met my eyes with something resembling understanding. Richard Blackstone occupied the front pew, like a king holding court. At 52, with silver temples and a perpetual tan, he looked every inch the successful venture capitalist. He comforted Thomas with practiced movements, a hand on the shoulder here, a supportive nod there. To everyone watching, he was the perfect father figure. To me, he was a vulture who'd circled our marriage until he found the perfect moment to strike. After the service, I lingered near my car in the parking lot, not ready to face the reception where I'd be about as welcome as a virus in a sterile lab. That's when I heard Thomas's voice carrying across the rows of expensive vehicles. He was on his phone, pacing between a Mercedes and a Bentley, clearly believing himself alone. Yes, the old man showed up. He said, his grief evaporating like morning dew. Sitting in the back like some kind of ghost. No, he has no idea about the codicil. Pemberton confirmed it yesterday. $3 is perfect, just enough to prevent him from contesting on grounds of being forgotten. The rest transfers to the holding company, then to my trust within 6 months. My blood chilled as I listened, careful to stay hidden behind a large SUV. Thomas continued, his voice taking on an excited edge that seemed obscene, given we'd just buried his mother. Richard's lawyer made sure it's airtight. The cancer charity documentation is conveniently delayed, so that $50 million stays in play. By the time anyone notices, Legacy Holdings will have absorbed everything, and Whitmore Pharmaceuticals will be prepped for sale. Yes, the Asian markets are very interested. He ended the call with a laugh that would have broken Margaret's heart. I waited until his footsteps faded before emerging from my hiding spot, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd overheard. Legacy Holdings, offshore transfers, and most disturbingly, the deliberate sabotage of Margaret's charitable wishes. That afternoon, instead of going home to my empty house, I drove to a nondescript office building in Queens. Marcus Sullivan operated from the 3rd floor, his private investigation firm, occupying a corner suite that belied the sophistication of his operations. A former FBI financial crimes specialist, Marcus had helped me with corporate espionage cases before the divorce. More importantly, he was one of the few people I trusted completely. Gary. He greeted me, his linebacker frame filling the doorway. I'm sorry about Margaret. Despite everything, I know you loved her. I settled into the worn leather chair across from his desk, noticing the wall of commendations from his bureau days. Marcus, I need your help. Thomas and Richard Blackstone are planning something, and it's bigger than just stealing an inheritance. Over the next hour, I laid out everything: Janet's revelations, the overheard phone call, the references to Legacy Holdings and offshore accounts. Marcus took notes in his precise handwriting, occasionally asking clarifying questions that showed why the FBI had valued him so highly. The holding company structure is classic asset hiding. He explained, pulling up financial databases on his computer. They create layers of ownership that make it nearly impossible to trace money flow. But if they're moving this fast, they're probably making mistakes. We spent the next 3 days unraveling the web Thomas and Richard had woven. Marcus worked his contacts in banking and corporate registration, while I discreetly reached out to old colleagues who might have information. The picture that emerged was staggering in its audacity. Legacy Holdings LLC was registered in Delaware, with a subsidiary in the Cayman Islands. The paperwork showed Thomas as CEO and Richard as chairman, positions they'd held for over a year. Through forensic accounting that would have impressed the IRS, Marcus traced dozens of transfers from Whitmore Pharmaceuticals accounts to consulting firms that existed only on paper. Your son's been embezzling for at least 3 years. Marcus concluded, spreading financial records across his conference table. Small amounts at first, probably testing the waters. But in the last 6 months since Margaret got sick, he's accelerated. We're looking at 30 million, maybe more. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus had tracked down Maria Hernandez, the private nurse who'd cared for Margaret in her final months. She lived in a modest apartment in Brooklyn, far from the Westchester mansion where she'd worked. When we knocked on her door, identifying ourselves, her face crumpled with relief. "I've been praying someone would come," she said, ushering us into her small living room. "What they did to Mrs. Whitmore, it wasn't right." Maria's story added another layer to the horror. She'd been hired through an agency Richard recommended, but her actual employer turned out to be Thomas. Her duties went beyond medical care to include keeping detailed logs of Margaret's mental state and preventing unauthorized visitors, specifically me. "Mrs. Whitmore asked for you many times," Maria admitted, unable to meet my eyes. "Especially near the end. But Mr. Thomas always had excuses. He said you were trying to manipulate her, that seeing you would upset her treatment." Then Maria revealed something that changed everything. She pulled out her phone, fingers shaking, as she navigated to a folder marked Evidence. "I'm not supposed to have these," she whispered. "But when you work in healthcare, you learn to document everything. These are recordings from Mrs. Whitmore's room. I started making them when things felt wrong." The first recording was dated 3 weeks before Margaret's death. Her voice, weakened by illness, but clear in intent, filled the small apartment. "Maria, I need you to call Gary. I've made a terrible mistake. Thomas has poisoned my mind against him. I was so angry about the divorce I let myself believe the worst. But the papers he showed me, something's not right. Gary would never threaten me. We built that company to help people, and Gary always understood that better than anyone." My throat tightened, hearing her voice again, hearing the truth she'd discovered too late. Maria had dozens of recordings, each one more damning than the last. Margaret talking about wanting to change her will, about the charity she'd planned with such hope, about her growing suspicion that Thomas and Richard were not what they seemed. The most chilling recording was from 10 days before her death. Thomas's voice, cold and calculating, responded to his mother's request for her lawyer. "Now, Mother, you're not thinking clearly. The medications make you confused. Samuel Morrison is traveling, remember? And you already have a will. No need to upset everything when you should be focusing on rest. Here, let me increase your pain medication. You'll feel better soon." Maria's eyes filled with tears as the recording ended. The medication levels he ordered, they were too high. Not enough to kill, but enough to keep her confused. I tried to object, but he threatened to have me fired and blacklisted. I have a family to feed. Marcus and I exchanged glances. This went beyond financial fraud, into something far darker. We spent another 2 hours with Maria, documenting everything, having her sign affidavits, ensuring her evidence was preserved and authenticated. As we left her apartment, Marcus pulled me aside. "Gary, this is attempted murder territory. Your son didn't just want the money. He wanted to make sure Margaret couldn't change her mind about it." The drive back to my house felt endless. Every mile brought new revelations about how far Thomas had fallen. This wasn't just greed or choosing sides in a divorce. This was systematic, calculated evil perpetrated against his own mother. That night, I sat in my study surrounded by evidence of my son's crimes. Financial records showed embezzlement. Medical logs suggested deliberate overmedication. Recordings revealed Margaret's desperate attempts to make amends before Thomas silenced her. But among all the papers, one document stood out: a receipt from Morrison Klein and Associates dated just 20 days before Margaret's death. Samuel Morrison had been her personal attorney since before Thomas was born, handling everything from our prenuptial agreement to her charitable foundations. According to his office records, he'd visited Margaret at the mansion, spending 3 hours with her, while Thomas was at a business dinner. I called Morrison's office the next morning, reaching his assistant. "Mr. Morrison is returning from Europe tomorrow," she informed me. "He asked me to tell you specifically, Mr. Whitmore, that he'll be attending the will reading. He said you'd understand why." As I hung up, a plan began forming in my mind. Thomas thought he'd won, that his cruel scheme would leave me with nothing but $3 and bitter memories. But he'd made one crucial mistake, the same one that had cost him his humanity. He'd underestimated the power of truth and the persistence of those who seek it. The will reading was in 4 days. 4 days to finish gathering evidence, to prepare for whatever surprise Morrison might bring, and to decide how to handle the son who'd betrayed everything I'd tried to teach him. I picked up Maria's phone recordings again, listening to Margaret's voice one more time. "Gary always understood what mattered. I was so wrong." "I understand, Margaret," I whispered to the empty room. "And I promise your real wishes will be honored, even if it means destroying what our son has become." The 4 days between Maria's revelations and the will reading became the most intensive investigation of my life. Working with Marcus Sullivan, I assembled a team that would have made any FBI task force proud. We operated from Marcus's office, transforming his conference room into what he jokingly called Operation Truth Serum. Patricia Hawthorne proved invaluable. As CFO of Whitmore Pharmaceuticals, she'd noticed discrepancies, but hadn't connected them to Thomas. until I showed her our findings. She arrived at Marcus's office the morning after the funeral, carrying banker boxes filled with financial records. "I've been tracking irregularities for 18 months," she said, spreading spreadsheets across the table. "Every time I brought concerns to the board, Thomas had explanations. Consulting fees, research partnerships, market development. But look at this pattern." She traced columns of numbers with her finger, showing how amounts just under $10 million moved through the system every quarter. Board approval kicks in at $10 million. Thomas kept every transaction at $9.9 million or less. 37 transactions in 3 years, all to companies that Marcus confirmed don't really exist. We cross-referenced Patricia's data with Marcus's investigation. The shell companies all traced back to legacy holdings, and from there, to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Thomas had created an elaborate money laundering operation under the guise of expanding Whitmore's market reach. But here's what really makes me sick. Patricia continued pulling out another folder. 6 months ago, when Margaret got her diagnosis, Thomas accelerated everything. He knew she'd be too ill to notice, too dependent on him to question anything. Meanwhile, Marcus worked another angle. Through contacts in New York's legal community, he discovered that Samuel Morrison had indeed visited Margaret 20 days before her death. The mansion's security logs, which Marcus obtained through a source, showed Morrison arriving at 2 in the afternoon and leaving at 5:30, while Thomas was at a documented board meeting. Morrison's assistant won't say much, Marcus reported, but she did mention he had 2 witnesses with him, not legal assistants, but independent witnesses. That suggests a will change or codicil. I spent my time diving deeper into Richard Blackstone's background. What I found explained his desperation to get his hands on Margaret's fortune. 3 failed ventures in 5 years had left him nearly bankrupt. His lifestyle, the Manhattan penthouse, the house in the Hamptons, the private jet he leased, all of it was sustained by credit and increasingly nervous investors. Court records showed 17 lawsuits from former business partners. A pattern emerged. Blackstone would identify wealthy targets, usually divorced women, charm his way into their lives, then systematically drain their assets through bad investments that somehow always benefited him. "He's a professional predator," Marcus concluded. Margaret was his biggest score, but only if he could access her wealth. Enter Thomas, the inside man who could make it happen. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Chen, Margaret's oncologist, reached out after hearing about our investigation through medical community channels. She met us at a small restaurant near the hospital, her face grave. "I've been troubled by Mrs. Whitmore's treatment plan for months," she began. Thomas insisted on controlling her medications, bringing in his own nursing staff, limiting my access. When I objected, he threatened to move her to another hospital. She produced Margaret's medical charts. "Look at these medication levels. Morphine doses that would confuse anyone, benzodiazepines that weren't medically necessary." I documented my concerns, but Thomas always had paperwork showing Margaret requested these specific doses. "Did she?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "I saw her alone exactly once, 2 weeks before she died. She could barely stay awake, but she grabbed my hand and said, 'Tell Gary I'm sorry. Tell him Thomas is not what he seems.'" Before I could respond, Thomas arrived and had me escorted out. We added Dr. Chen's testimony to our growing mountain of evidence. But evidence was only part of the equation. The will reading would be a legal proceeding, and Thomas would have Pemberton, the estate attorney, on his side. We needed something more decisive. That's when I remembered the $3 Foundation, a charity I'd quietly established years ago to help families torn apart by financial disputes. Through the foundation, I'd met Judge Harold Winters, now retired but still influential in New York legal circles. I called him, explaining our situation. "Gary, what you're describing is criminal conspiracy," he said after listening. "If even half of this is true, your son and Blackstone are looking at federal charges. Have you contacted law enforcement?" "Not yet," I admitted. "I want to see what happens at the will reading first. Morrison seems to have something planned. Judge Winters was quiet for a moment. Be careful, Gary. Cornered criminals do desperate things. But if you need legal weight at that reading, call me. I still have contacts who can ensure everything is done properly. The night before the will reading, our team met one final time. We had documented evidence of embezzlement totaling $37 million. We had medical records suggesting deliberate overmedication. We had recordings of Margaret trying to change her will while Thomas prevented it. We had proof of Richard Blackstone's financial desperation and his history of defrauding wealthy women. It's enough to bury them both, Marcus said, organizing everything into carefully labeled folders. But we still don't know what Morrison has planned. Patricia looked at me across the conference table. Gary, are you prepared for tomorrow? Whatever happens, Thomas is still your son. I thought about the boy who'd helped me in the lab, who'd wanted to develop medicines for children who couldn't afford them. That boy had been replaced by a stranger who would drug his own mother for money. My son died somewhere along the way, I said quietly. The man we're facing tomorrow is someone else, someone who chose greed over everything I tried to teach him. Margaret deserved better. The company deserves better. The thousands of people who depend on our medicines deserve better. Marcus handed me a flash drive containing copies of everything. For insurance, he said. If something goes wrong tomorrow, this goes to the FBI, the SEC, and every major news outlet in the country. I drove home through empty streets, the city quiet in the pre-dawn hours. Tomorrow, in Pemberton's law office, Thomas expected to claim his stolen fortune. He thought he'd planned for everything, that his cruel scheme was foolproof. But Thomas had forgotten something I'd taught him long ago in the lab. The most dangerous variable in any experiment is the one you don't know exists. And Samuel Morrison, Margaret's personal attorney for 25 years, was a variable Thomas had never considered. I pulled into my driveway as the sun began to rise, painting the sky the color of hope. In my pocket, I carried $3 bills I'd withdrawn from the bank. If Margaret had indeed left me $3, as Thomas claimed, I wanted to be prepared. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest meaning. Inside, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Margaret and I had planned our future 30 years ago. We'd started with nothing but dreams and determination. Thomas thought he was ending my story with $3 and humiliation. He had no idea that some stories have chapters the villain never sees coming. The will reading was scheduled for 10 o'clock. In 5 hours, the trap Thomas had set for me would spring. The question was, who would be caught in it? I lifted my coffee cup in a toast to the empty chair across from me. For you, Margaret, I said softly. For the woman who wanted to make things right. Today, we finish what you started. The law offices of Pemberton Ashford and Associates occupied the 40th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, their reception area designed to intimidate with marble floors and original artwork. I arrived at 9:50, wearing my best suit, not designer like Thomas's, but the navy blue Margaret had bought me for our 20th anniversary. Thomas was already there, lounging in a leather chair like he owned the place. Richard Blackstone sat beside him, scrolling through his phone with the casual arrogance of someone confident in victory. They looked up as I entered Thomas's face, splitting into that cruel smile I'd grown to despise. Dad, he said, the word dripping with false sympathy. Good of you to come. I know this must be difficult. Thomas. I nodded, taking a seat across from them. Richard. Blackstone barely acknowledged me, but I caught him texting rapidly, probably alerting his offshore bankers to prepare for incoming transfers. Other attendees filtered in: Patricia Hawthorne representing the company, Margaret's sister Eleanor from Boston, several longtime employees who'd received small bequests, and various charity representatives looking uncomfortable in the tense atmosphere. At precisely 10 o'clock, James Pemberton entered, carrying a leather portfolio that presumably contained Margaret's will. He was everything you'd expect from a high-powered estate attorney, silver-haired, immaculately dressed with the practiced solemnity of someone who delivered bad news for a living. Thank you all for coming. He began settling behind his massive desk. "We're here to read the last will and testament of Margaret Louise Whitmore, dated 18 months ago, and properly witnessed according to New York state law." Thomas shifted forward in his seat, trying to contain his eagerness. I noticed him pat his jacket pocket, and for a moment, I wondered if he'd actually brought 3 $1 bills to give me, adding insult to injury. Pemberton began with the standard legal language confirming Margaret's identity, stating she was of sound mind and body at the time of writing. Then came the bequests. "To my faithful housekeeper, Rosa Martinez, who served our family for 15 years, I leave the sum of $250,000 and my personal jewelry collection with the hope she'll remember our Tuesday tea times fondly." Rosa, sitting in the back, gasped and began crying quietly. Thomas rolled his eyes at the emotion. "To my sister, Eleanor Catherine Daniels, I leave my vacation home in Cape Cod and the sum of $5 million along with my collection of first edition novels she always admired." Eleanor nodded gracefully, though I saw her dab at her eyes. She'd been one of the few family members who hadn't taken sides in the divorce. The bequests continued, $100,000 each to 5 longtime employees, $50,000 to Margaret's personal trainer, various amounts to household staff. With each name, Thomas's smile grew wider. These amounts were pocket change compared to the estate's total value. "To the Margaret Whitmore Children's Cancer Research Center," Pemberton continued, then paused. "This bequest is marked as pending final documentation. The amount specified is $50 million contingent upon completion of organizational paperwork filed with the state, which unfortunately wasn't completed before Mrs. Whitmore's passing." Thomas interjected smoothly. "Such a shame. Mother would have been disappointed." Several charity representatives shifted uncomfortably. They'd obviously been told the donation was coming, only to have it snatched away by bureaucratic technicalities that Thomas had undoubtedly orchestrated. Pemberton cleared his throat and continued. "Now, to the primary distributions. To my son Thomas Andrew Whitmore, I leave the following: the family estate in Westchester County, valued at approximately $12 million. The apartment in Manhattan, valued at $8 million. My investment portfolio, managed by Goldman Sachs, currently valued at $47 million. My art collection, valued at $15 million. And finally, controlling interest in Whitmore Pharmaceuticals, representing 51% of company stock, valued at approximately $98 million. Thomas couldn't contain himself anymore. He actually laughed, a short bark of triumph that echoed in the somber room. "Well deserved," Richard muttered, clapping him on the shoulder. And finally, Pemberton said, his voice taking on an odd tone, "To my former husband, Gary Michael Whitmore, I leave the sum of $3 as a reminder of our beginning, when we had nothing but $3 between us and a dream of helping others." The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at me, some with pity, others with curiosity about how I'd react. Thomas reached into his pocket, and just as I'd predicted, pulled out 3 $1 bills. He made a show of standing up, walking over to me, and placing them on the small table beside my chair. "Here you go, Dad," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Don't spend it all in one place. Though I guess at your age, $3 might need to last a while." I picked up the bills, examined them carefully, then folded them neatly and placed them in my shirt pocket. "Thank you, Thomas. I'll treasure these." My calm reaction seemed to disappoint him. He'd expected anger, maybe tears, certainly some kind of scene. Instead, I sat quietly, hands folded, waiting. "Is that everything, Mr. Pemberton?" Patricia Hawthorne asked, her voice carefully neutral, though I saw the disgust in her eyes at Thomas's behavior. "There is one small matter," Pemberton said, seeming uncomfortable. "Mrs. Whitmore insisted on a sealed envelope to be opened only after the primary will reading. She was very specific about this in her instructions." Thomas froze halfway back to his seat. "What envelope? You didn't mention any envelope in our previous discussions." "Because Mrs. Whitmore's instructions were quite clear," Pemberton replied, producing a manila envelope from his portfolio. This was to remain sealed until after the initial distributions were read. This is highly irregular. Richard Blackstone spoke for the first time, his voice sharp. Any codicils or amendments should have been disclosed beforehand. Pemberton shrugged. I'm simply following my client's wishes. The envelope was delivered to my office by Mrs. Whitmore's personal attorney, with instructions to include it in today's proceedings. Personal attorney? Thomas's voice cracked slightly. You're her attorney. I'm the estate attorney she hired 18 months ago, Pemberton clarified. But Mrs. Whitmore maintained other legal representation for personal matters. He broke the seal on the envelope, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and began reading, If this letter is being read, then the distributions from my will have been announced. I have one final instruction. My personal attorney, Samuel Morrison, has documentation that supersedes all previous arrangements. He should be arriving momentarily. As if on cue, the conference room door opened. Samuel Morrison entered, looking exactly as I remembered him, tall, distinguished, carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd practiced law for 40 years. Behind him came two people I didn't recognize, a man and woman in business attire. My apologies for the dramatic entrance, Morrison said, though his slight smile suggested he wasn't sorry at all. I was delayed returning from Europe, but I'm here now with documentation that I believe will interest everyone. Thomas stood up so fast, his chair rolled backward. What is this? What documentation? The will has been read. Morrison set his briefcase on the conference table with deliberate calm. Mr. Pemberton read a will, certainly. One created 18 months ago. However, I have here a more recent document that takes precedence. That's impossible. Richard Blackstone was on his feet now, too. Margaret wasn't competent to make changes. She was on heavy medications, confused. Interesting that you would know about her medical condition in such detail, Mr. Blackstone, Morrison observed mildly, considering you weren't family or medical personnel. But to address your concern, I have here sworn statements from two independent doctors who examined Mrs. Whitmore 3 weeks before her death, confirming her mental competency. He pulled out official-looking documents, laying them out carefully. I also have a video recording of Mrs. Whitmore made in the presence of these two witnesses, clearly stating her intentions and revoking all previous wills. The color drained from Thomas's face. You can't. This is fraud. She wasn't capable of making decisions. Would you like to see the video? Morrison asked pleasantly. I have it here on my laptop. Though I warn you, Mr. Whitmore, Thomas, that is, your mother had some rather pointed things to say about your recent behavior. Thomas sank back into his chair, his triumph evaporating like morning mist. Richard grabbed his arm, whispering urgently, but Thomas seemed beyond hearing. He stared at Morrison with the expression of someone watching their world collapse in real time. I think, Morrison continued, we should all see what Margaret Whitmore really wanted. Mr. Pemberton, may I use your conference room's video system? Pemberton, looking as shocked as everyone else, nodded mutely. As Morrison set up his laptop, I caught Patricia's eye. She gave me the slightest nod, her hand moving to her phone. If things went badly, our evidence would be released within minutes. But I had a feeling things were about to go very well indeed. I touched the $3 in my pocket, thinking of Margaret's words about remembering our beginning. She'd always been cleverer than people gave her credit for. Ready? Morrison asked, finger poised over the play button. This video was recorded in Mrs. Whitmore's bedroom on April 15th, 3 weeks and 2 days before her passing. Please pay attention not just to her words, but to her clarity and determination. He pressed play, and Margaret's face filled the screen. Even weakened by illness, her eyes blazed with a fury I remembered from our early days when she'd fought corporate boards and government regulators to get our medicines to market. Thomas made a sound like a wounded animal. Richard Blackstone's phone clattered to the floor, and in that moment, I knew that everything was about to change. The trap hadn't been Thomas's after all. It had been Margaret's set, with the precision of someone who'd built an empire, and wasn't about to let it fall into the wrong hands. Even in death, she was still the brilliant strategist I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Margaret's face on the conference room screen commanded absolute attention. Despite the ravages of cancer, her eyes held the sharp intelligence that had built a pharmaceutical empire. She sat propped up in her bed, wearing the burgundy robe I'd given her for our last anniversary together. The timestamp showed April 15th, 3 weeks before her death. "My name is Margaret Louise Whitmore." She began, her voice clear despite its weakness. "I am of sound mind and body, as has been verified by Dr. Kenneth Hartman and Dr. Louise Brenner, who are present as witnesses, along with my attorney Samuel Morrison." The camera panned briefly to show the two doctors whom Morrison now introduced as the same witnesses standing in the conference room. They nodded confirmation. Margaret continued, "I am recording this video to revoke all previous wills and codicils, and to state my true intentions for my estate. What I'm about to reveal will shock many of you, but every word is true, and I have documentation to prove it." Thomas gripped the conference table so hard his knuckles went white. Richard Blackstone had gone pale, his usual swagger completely evaporated. 3 months ago, Margaret said, "I discovered that my son Thomas Andrew Whitmore has been systematically stealing from Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. Along with Richard Blackstone, the man I foolishly allowed into our lives, he has embezzled approximately $37 million through fraudulent consulting contracts and shell companies." "That's a lie," Thomas shouted at the screen, but Morrison raised a hand for silence. Margaret's image continued relentlessly. "I have copies of bank records, emails, and recorded conversations proving this theft. Thomas and Richard created a company called Legacy Holdings to funnel money from the pharmaceutical company that Gary and I built to help sick people who couldn't afford medicine. They've perverted everything we stood for out of pure greed." She paused, taking a labored breath. "But the financial crimes are not the worst of it. When I confronted Thomas about my suspicions 6 weeks ago, he began controlling my medication, keeping me sedated and confused. My nurse, Maria Hernandez, has recordings of Thomas ordering dose increases that my oncologist never approved. He wanted me unable to change my will or report his crimes." Several people in the room gasped. Eleanor covered her mouth in horror. Even Pemberton looked shaken. "The man I thought I was punishing by leaving him $3 was Gary." Margaret continued, and her voice broke slightly. "My former husband, who despite our differences never stopped believing in the mission of our company. Thomas showed me emails suggesting Gary planned to contest the will, that he was greedy and waiting for me to die. I've since learned these emails were fabricated." On screen, Margaret held up a folder. "Mr. Morrison has the originals of these forged documents, along with digital forensics proving Thomas created them. My son turned me against the one person who truly understood what Whitmore Pharmaceuticals meant." Thomas stood abruptly. "I'm not listening to this." She was sick confused. "Sit down, Mr. Whitmore," Morrison said coldly. "There's more, and I believe the federal agents waiting outside would prefer you hear it all before they come in." Federal agents. Richard Blackstone jumped up, moving toward the door, but Morrison's two witnesses stepped in front of it. "Did you really think you could steal $37 million and face no consequences?" Morrison asked. "The FBI and SEC have been building a case for weeks. We were simply waiting for today to ensure all evidence was properly presented." On the video, Margaret was still speaking. "Therefore, I hereby revoke all previous wills and declare the following as my final wishes. To my son, Thomas Andrew Whitmore, I leave the sum of $3, not as a reminder of humble beginnings, but as a symbol of what he valued our family legacy at, the price of a cup of coffee." Thomas's face contorted with rage, but he said nothing, trapped between Morrison's witnesses and the federal agents supposedly outside. To Gary Michael Whitmore, Margaret continued, "I leave full control of Whitmore Pharmaceuticals with the instruction that he continue our mission of providing affordable medicine to those in need. I also leave him my personal apologies for believing lies over the truth of his character. Gary, you were right about everything, and I was a fool to let anger cloud my judgment. I felt tears sting my eyes but kept my composure. This wasn't the time for emotion. All personal assets. Margaret went on, including the house's investments and art collection, are to be liquidated and used to fund the Margaret Whitmore Children's Cancer Research Center, which Mr. Morrison has already established with the proper paperwork. $50 million will be the initial funding, with the remainder creating an endowment for perpetual operation. She looked directly into the camera, then, as if seeing through time to this moment. Thomas, if you're watching this, know that I loved the boy you were. That boy who helped his father in the lab, who cried when we couldn't save every patient, who wanted to change the world. I don't know when you became this stranger who would poison his own mother for money, but I won't let you destroy what your father and I built. The video continued for another 10 minutes, detailing specific distributions to employees and charities, but the damage was done. When Morrison finally stopped the playback, the room sat in stunned silence. "This is fake," Thomas finally managed. "Deep fakes, AI, whatever. My mother would never—" Morrison pulled out a thick folder. "Would you like to see the bank records showing your transfers to Legacy Holdings? The emails where you discuss handling your mother? The medical records showing unauthorized medication increases? Or perhaps we should play the audio recordings Maria Hernandez made of you threatening her job if she didn't comply with your dosing instructions." "You don't understand," Thomas said desperately, turning to the room at large. "I was protecting the company. These investments were legitimate. Mother was sick. She needed help managing things." "Is that why you met with Hong Kong Pharmaceuticals last month?" Patricia Hawthorne spoke up, holding her phone. "I just received confirmation from my contact there. You were negotiating to sell Whitmore Pharmaceuticals the moment you gained control. They offered $2 billion for our patent portfolio alone. The patents for medicines that we provide at cost to developing nations," I added quietly. "Medicines that would suddenly cost 20 times more under new ownership." Richard Blackstone made another move toward the door. "This doesn't concern me. I'm leaving." Morrison smiled coldly. "Mr. Blackstone, given that you're listed as chairman of Legacy Holdings and co-signed on every fraudulent transfer, I'd suggest you stay. The agents outside have warrants for both of you." As if on cue, the conference room door opened. 3 FBI agents entered, their credentials visible, their expressions professional but firm. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s, addressed the room. "I'm Special Agent Sarah Foster. We have warrants for the arrest of Thomas Andrew Whitmore and Richard Marcus Blackstone on charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Gentlemen, please stand and place your hands behind your backs." "Attempted murder," Eleanor gasped. "The medical evidence suggests Mr. Whitmore deliberately over-medicated his mother to keep her incapacitated," Agent Foster explained. "That crosses the line from fraud into attempted murder." Thomas looked wildly around the room, seeking any ally. His eyes landed on me. "Dad, please. Tell them this is a mistake. I'm your son. Your only son." I stood slowly, pulling the $3 from my pocket. "You're right, Thomas. You are my son. Which makes this betrayal even worse." I placed the bills on the table in front of him. "Your mother left these for you. $3. The price she decided your integrity was worth." The agents moved in, efficiently handcuffing both men. Richard maintained his cold silence, but Thomas broke completely. "You don't understand," he screamed as they led him away. "I earned that money. I deserved it. You're all fools who don't understand how business really works. Dad, you'll regret this. You'll die alone with your precious medicines and no family." His voice faded as the agents escorted him out. The room remained silent for several long moments before Morrison spoke again. "Mr. Whitmore, Gary, there are papers to sign to formally transfer control of the company. The board has already been notified and is prepared to reinstate you as CEO effective immediately." I nodded, still processing everything. Patricia came over and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. The company needs you, Gary. We all knew something was wrong, but we couldn't prove it. Thank God Margaret found the strength to make this right. Morrison turned on the video, one last time, forwarding to the end. Margaret appeared again, looking directly at the camera. Gary, she said softly, I know you're watching this. I was wrong about so many things, but mostly, I was wrong about you. You tried to warn me about Thomas, about what he was becoming, but I was too proud to listen. Take care of our company. Make sure it continues to help people. And know that despite everything, I never stopped loving the man who shared $3 and a dream with me all those years ago. The screen went dark. In the silence that followed, I felt the weight of 30 years lift from my shoulders. Margaret had found a way, even in death, to save both our company and our legacy from the son who'd betrayed everything we'd taught him. There's one more thing, Morrison said, pulling out a small velvet box. Margaret wanted you to have this back. Inside was her wedding ring, the simple gold band I'd bought with my first paycheck from the lab. Not the elaborate diamond Richard had given her, but the ring that represented our beginning. She was wearing it when she died, Morrison said quietly. The nurses thought it odd since she'd remarried, but she insisted. Said it was the only real marriage she'd ever had. I slipped the ring into my pocket, next to the $3. Two symbols of a journey that had come full circle in the most unexpected way. The meeting broke up slowly, people struggling to process what they'd witnessed. As I prepared to leave to head to Whitmore Pharmaceuticals and begin repairing the damage Thomas had done, Eleanor approached. I'm sorry I stayed neutral during the divorce, she said. I should have seen what was happening. You couldn't have known, I assured her. None of us wanted to believe Thomas was capable of this. She hugged me briefly. Margaret would be proud that you're taking care of the company. And Gary that research center she wanted. Make it the best in the world. For her. I promised I would. As I left Pemberton's office, passing the FBI agents still processing the scene, I thought about the strange turns life takes. I'd walked in expecting to receive $3 and humiliation. Instead, I'd received justice, vindication, and the chance to honor Margaret's true legacy. But there was still work to be done. The arrests were just the beginning. The full truth had to come out, and Whitmore Pharmaceuticals had to be saved from the damage Thomas and Richard had inflicted. It was time to show everyone what happened when greed tried to destroy something built on compassion and purpose. The news broke within hours. By evening, every major outlet was running variations of the same headline: Pharmaceutical heir arrested for embezzling from dying mother. The story had everything the media loved: wealth betrayal and a shocking reversal of fortune. But the real fireworks came the next morning, when the FBI held a press conference. I stood in the back of the packed room at Federal Plaza, watching Special Agent Foster lay out the case against Thomas and Richard. She was thorough and devastating, presenting evidence that painted a picture of greed so profound it shocked even hardened reporters. The investigation reveals a 3-year pattern of systematic theft. Foster announced, clicking through slides showing financial documents. Thomas Whitmore and Richard Blackstone created elaborate shell companies to siphon funds from Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. But when Mrs. Margaret Whitmore discovered their scheme, they escalated to medical manipulation to prevent her from reporting them. The room erupted with questions. Foster fielded them calmly, each answer revealing new depths to my son's betrayal. The embezzled funds meant for drug research. The fake consulting companies billing for services never rendered. The medication logs showing dangerous doses administered against medical advice. Is it true Mr. Whitmore was planning to sell the company to foreign interests? A reporter from the Wall Street Journal asked. We have evidence of negotiations with multiple international pharmaceutical companies, Foster confirmed. The plan was to gain control through inheritance, then immediately liquidate. This would have ended Whitmore's humanitarian programs that provide free and reduced-cost medications to over 3 million patients worldwide. I slipped out as the questions continued, driving directly to Whitmore Pharmaceuticals headquarters. The building I'd helped design 30 years ago stood like a beacon of everything Margaret and I had believed in. It was time to fight for that vision. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock. I entered through the employee entrance, wanting to avoid the media circus at the main doors. But word of my arrival spread quickly. By the time I reached the executive floor, employees lined the hallways. Some applauded, others simply nodded respectfully, and many had tears in their eyes. "Welcome back, Dr. Whitmore," said Janet Morrison, my former secretary, who'd risked everything to bring me the first evidence. "We've been waiting for you." The boardroom was packed. All 12 board members were present, along with senior executives and legal counsel. I took my place at the head of the table, the seat I'd vacated 5 years ago during the divorce. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, looking at each face. "We have a crisis. Our former vice president of operations has been arrested for embezzling $37 million. Our reputation is under assault. Our stock has dropped 18% in one day. And international competitors are already circling, hoping to buy our assets cheaply. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Patricia Hawthorne stood first. "I move to formally reinstate Dr. Gary Whitmore as CEO and chairman, with full authority to implement emergency measures to stabilize the company." The vote was unanimous. I'd spent the previous night preparing, and now I unveiled my plan. First, complete transparency. We would open our books to independent auditors, showing everyone exactly what had been stolen and how. Second, we would accelerate our humanitarian programs, proving that Whitmore's mission remained intact despite the betrayal. But most importantly, I continued, we're going to turn this crisis into an opportunity. Margaret wanted to fund a children's cancer research center. We're going to build it, and it's going to be the finest pediatric oncology facility in the world. Every dollar Thomas stole will be recovered and put towards saving children's lives. The board approved every measure. As the meeting concluded, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Sullivan. "Turn on Channel 4, now." The breakroom television showed a live broadcast from the Manhattan detention complex. Thomas, in orange jail clothes, was being led to a transport van. Reporters shouted questions, and in a moment of pure rage, he turned to the cameras. "My father set me up," he screamed. "This is all his plan to steal what my mother wanted me to have. He's the criminal here. He manipulated a dying woman." But his rant was cut short as guards hustled him into the van. The news anchor returned, looking skeptical. Those claims seemed to contradict the video evidence of Mrs. Whitmore herself exposing her son's crimes. We go now to our financial correspondent at Whitmore Pharmaceuticals, where employees are gathering to support their reinstated CEO. I looked out the window to see hundreds of employees on the plaza, many holding signs, "Welcome back, Dr. Whitmore," and "Patience over profits," and "Margaret's vision lives on." These were the people Thomas had been ready to throw away for a quick sale. That evening, I held an all-hands meeting in the main auditorium. Over 2,000 employees attended in person, with thousands more joining virtually from our facilities worldwide. I stood before them, no prepared speech, just truth. "Many of you have asked how this happened," I began. "How did we not see what Thomas was doing? The answer is painful but simple. We trusted him because he was my son, because he was Margaret's son. That trust was betrayed, but it won't make us cynical. It will make us vigilant." I outlined the recovery plan, the protections we'd implement, and, most importantly, the expansion of our mission. Thomas saw you all as numbers on a spreadsheet, costs to be cut. But you are the heart of this company. You are the reason a child in Bangladesh can afford insulin, why a grandfather in Peru can get heart medication, why a mother in Detroit doesn't have to choose between groceries and her cancer treatment. The applause was thunderous, but I wasn't finished. "There will be those who say this scandal weakens us, makes us vulnerable to takeover. They're wrong. We're going to emerge stronger, more focused, and more committed to Margaret's and my original dream. And we're going to do it together. The next weeks were a whirlwind. The FBI investigation expanded, uncovering more victims of Richard Blackstone's schemes. 3 other wealthy women came forward, revealing how he'd charmed his way into their lives and portfolios. The total theft across all his victims exceeded $100 million. Thomas's trial became a media sensation. His lawyers tried various defenses. Mental illness manipulation by Blackstone, even claiming I'd somehow brainwashed Margaret in her final days. But the evidence was overwhelming. Maria Hernandez testified about the medication manipulation. Dr. Chen detailed the medical harm. Patricia presented the financial forensics with devastating precision. The most damaging testimony came from Thomas himself. Under cross-examination, his arrogance broke through. He ranted about deserving the money, about how his parents had wasted opportunities for wealth, about how only he understood modern business. The jury saw him for what he was, a man so consumed by greed, he'd poison his own mother. Throughout it all, I focused on rebuilding. The Margaret Whitmore Children's Cancer Research Center broke ground 6 months after her death. I insisted on one design element: a meditation garden with a fountain where water flowed over 3 symbolic stones, each representing one of the $3 that had started our journey. The international pharmaceutical companies that had been courting Thomas retreated once they realized Whitmore wasn't for sale. Our stock recovered and surpassed previous highs as investors recognized that ethical leadership was our greatest asset. We expanded our free medication programs, launched new research initiatives, and proved that profit and purpose could coexist. 1 year after the will reading, Patricia brought me a special report. "We've recovered all $37 million through asset seizure," she said. "Plus interest and penalties. Total recovery $42 million. Put it all into the research center," I instructed. "Every penny." She smiled. "I thought you'd say that. There's one more thing." She handed me a letter, forwarded from the federal prison where Thomas was serving his 25-year sentence. I recognized his handwriting but didn't open it. "Send it back," I said quietly. "With $3 for his commissary account. Nothing more, nothing less." Patricia understood. Thomas had valued money above everything else. Now he could contemplate that choice with exactly $3 to his name, the same amount he'd so cruelly tried to leave me. That evening, I stood in my office looking out at the city Margaret and I had conquered together. On my desk sat 2 items: her wedding ring, and those 3 $1 bills. Symbols of a journey that began with love and dreams, detoured through betrayal and pain, but ultimately found its way back to purpose. The phone rang. It was Eleanor, Margaret's sister. "Gary, I just wanted you to know that I was at the cemetery today. Someone had left fresh flowers on Margaret's grave. White roses, her favorites. The card just said, 'Promise kept.'" I smiled, knowing she'd understand who had left them and what promise had been fulfilled. Margaret had found the strength to make things right in her final days. The company we'd built would continue its mission. The Children's Cancer Center would save lives. And somewhere perhaps the boy Thomas had once been might remember what truly mattered. But that would be his journey to make alone in a cell with his $3 and the weight of his choices. My journey led elsewhere, back to the laboratory and the boardroom, back to the work of healing that Margaret and I had started with nothing but $3, and the belief that medicine should serve humanity, not greed. The truth had been revealed, justice had been served, and life in all its complex beauty continued. 5 years have passed since that dramatic will reading, and I'm standing in the Margaret Whitmore Children's Cancer Research Center, watching a 7-year-old girl ring the bell, signifying her last chemotherapy treatment. Her name is Hope, which feels appropriate given everything that's happened. Her treatment was developed here, funded by money recovered from Thomas's embezzlement, and provided free because her family couldn't afford the standard protocols. The research center has become everything Margaret envisioned and more. We've treated over 3,000 children, developed 4 breakthrough therapies, and maintained a 92% success rate for previously untreatable pediatric cancers. Every dollar stolen has been transformed into life saved. I'm 72 now, my hair completely white, but I've never felt more purposeful. Whitmore Pharmaceuticals has thrived under ethical leadership, our value tripling, as we've proven that compassion and profit aren't mutually exclusive. We've expanded our free medication programs to 43 countries, and our employee satisfaction ranks highest in the industry. Dr. Whitmore. Patricia Hawthorne approaches, still CFO, and now my closest advisor. There's someone here to see you. Says it's important. In my office, I find Maria Hernandez, the nurse, who'd courageously recorded evidence of Thomas's crimes. She's holding an envelope, her hands trembling slightly. Dr. Whitmore. I've debated whether to give you this, she says. It's from your son. Not through the prison. He asked another inmate who was released to mail it. I think you should read it. I take the letter, noting it's dated 2 months ago. After Maria leaves, I sit at my desk, those same $3 still in my drawer, and open it. Dad. It begins, and already I can see the handwriting is different. Less aggressive, more careful. I've had 5 years to think about what I did. For the first 3 years, I blamed everyone else. You, Mother Richard, the world. I was the victim in my own story. Then, something happened. A new inmate arrived, a young man who'd killed his parents for insurance money. He bragged about it, showed no remorse, and suddenly I saw myself. I saw what I'd become. I've been attending therapy, real therapy, not the performative kind my lawyer suggested. Dr. Martinez says I have narcissistic personality disorder, combined with severe entitlement issues stemming from growing up wealthy. I'm not using this as an excuse. There is no excuse for what I did to Mother, to you, to everyone who trusted me. I remember the day you taught me to use a microscope. I was 8, and you showed me how medicine could change lives. You said, Thomas, we have a responsibility to use our knowledge to help others. I forgot that lesson, choosing to see people as opportunities to exploit, rather than lives to improve. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I poisoned my own mother for money, betrayed the company you built, and tried to destroy everything you and Mother stood for. The $3 you send to my commissary account each month remind me of what I valued your love at. Nothing more than pocket change. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to change. I'm teaching literacy to other inmates using the education you and Mother provided for something positive. It's a small thing, but it's a start. I've also been working with the prison chaplain, not for sentence reduction, but because I need to understand how I became someone who could do such terrible things. Richard was sentenced to 30 years after they connected him to 3 other victims. He still maintains we did nothing wrong, that it was just business. I've refused to speak to him for 2 years now. I see how he manipulated my greed, but I chose to listen. I chose to betray you. I've enclosed a letter for the parole board, stating I don't want early release. 25 years isn't enough for what I did, but it's what I was given, and I'll serve every day. I've also written to the families affected by my embezzlement, apologizing for delaying research that might have saved lives. Dad, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Maria Hernandez visits sometimes. She's forgiven me, though I don't understand how. She tells me about the research center, about the children being saved. Every life saved feels like a small redemption for the evil I did. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that somewhere inside this broken man, a piece of the boy you raised still exists. The boy who cried when we couldn't save everyone, who wanted to help people who loved his parents. I killed that boy with my greed, but maybe some part of him can be salvaged. Whether you believe me or not, I'm proud of what you've done with the company. You and Mother built something beautiful, and I nearly destroyed it. Thank you for saving it, for saving her legacy, for being the father I was too blind to appreciate. Your son, if I can still call myself that, Thomas. I set the letter down, staring out at the research center's gardens, where families find hope every day. The $3 in my drawer seemed to pulse with meaning. Not mockery now, but possibility. $3 was all Margaret and I had when we started. $3 was what Thomas left me. $3 is what I send him each month, not as punishment, but as reminder. After a long moment, I make a decision. I call Patricia in. I want to establish a program for children of incarcerated parents, providing counseling and support to break cycles of criminal behavior. Fund it through my personal donation. Call it the Second Chances Initiative. She nods, understanding without explanation. This isn't forgiveness for Thomas. Some betrayals cut too deep for that. But it's acknowledgement that redemption must be possible, even for those who've fallen furthest. That evening, I visit Margaret's grave as I do every month. The white roses I'd placed earlier are still fresh, and I add a new bouquet. Yellow roses for new beginnings. I tell her about Thomas's letter, about the research center's success, about the lives saved with money he tried to steal. He's trying, Margaret, I say to the polished granite stone. I don't know if it's real or if it will last, but he's trying. Maybe that's all any of us can do. Try to be better than we were yesterday. A young couple passes by the woman, clearly a patient with her bald head, covered by a colorful scarf. They nod respectfully, and I realize they might be beneficiaries of our free treatment program. Lives saved, because Margaret found the courage to expose our son's crimes. I return to my office where two photos now sit on my desk. One is Margaret and me on our wedding day, young and hopeful with $3 between us. The other is from last week. The 1,000 children we've treated ringing bells together in celebration, their faces bright with futures Thomas tried to steal. My phone rings. It's the night supervisor at the research center. Dr. Whitmore, I thought you'd want to know. The new immunotherapy trial just showed complete remission in all 12 participants. We might have cracked the code on childhood leukemia. I thank him and hang up, touching those $3 one more time. From $3 to an empire. From an empire to betrayal. From betrayal to redemption. The circle of life, messy and painful and beautiful. Tomorrow, I'll return to work pushing forward Margaret's vision of medicine that serves humanity. I'll review research proposals, meet with families, and continue building something that can't be destroyed by greed or betrayal. But tonight, I'll go home to my modest ranch house, cook a simple dinner, and perhaps write a brief response to Thomas. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but acknowledgement. 3 words, like $3, carrying more weight than their size suggests. Keep trying, son. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. Take our $3, whatever form they come in, and try to build something worthy. Margaret did it. I've done it. And maybe in a cell with $3 to his name, Thomas is finally learning to do it too. The Margaret Whitmore Children's Cancer Research Center stands as a testament to truth, conquering deception, love, outlasting betrayal, and purpose prevailing over greed. Every child who walks out cancer-free is a victory over everything Thomas and Richard represented. Every family reunited is proof that good can come from even the darkest chapters. I close my office, leaving the building as janitors begin their night shift. Several wave and call out greetings. These are the people Thomas never saw, the invisible workforce that keeps hope running. I know their names, their families, their struggles. They are the true wealth of Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. As I drive home through the city, Margaret and I conquered together. I think about the journey. 37 years ago, we had $3 and a dream. Today, that dream saves lives across the globe. Thomas tried to kill it for money, but dreams rooted in purpose are harder to kill than he realized. My story could have ended with $3 and bitterness. Instead, it continues with $3 and purpose. Every day, I choose to honor what Margaret and I built rather than mourn what Thomas destroyed. Every day, I prove that wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in lives touched, hopes restored, and futures made possible. The $3 in my desk drawer will stay there until the day I die, a reminder that everything begins and ends with choices. Margaret chose truth in her final days. I chose purpose over bitterness. Thomas is choosing finally to face who he became. And thousands of children choose life because we refused to let greed win. That's the real inheritance. Not money or companies or estates, but the understanding that $3 and compassion can change the world. Margaret knew it. I know it. And perhaps in his way, Thomas is finally learning it too. As I pull into my driveway, I see a package on my doorstep. Inside is a handmade wooden frame, crafted with obvious care despite amateur skill. It holds a simple message burned into the wood from $3 Infinite Hope, made by inmate 24601, Woodworking Therapy Program. I hang it in my study next to Margaret's photo. Tomorrow brings new challenges, new opportunities to honor her legacy. But tonight, I'm at peace, knowing that even from the depths of betrayal and greed, redemption remains possible. $3 started our journey. $3 nearly ended it. And now $3 reminds us daily that true wealth lies not in what we take, but in what we give. The story that began with a cruel son's mockery has become something greater, a testament to justice, served truth revealed, and the enduring power of purpose over profit. Margaret would be proud, and that more than any inheritance is everything. What would you do if you discovered a family member was betraying everything your family stood for? Would you have the courage to expose them, even if it meant watching them fall? Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the greatest good and justice. Though painful, paves the way for true healing. If this story touched your heart, or made you think about the values that truly matter in life, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please take a moment to like this video. If it resonated with you, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice and redemption, and share this with someone who needs to hear that truth. And integrity will always triumph over greed and betrayal. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, sometimes the smallest gestures like 3 simple dollars can carry the weight of an entire legacy. May you find the courage to stand for what's right, no matter the cost.